Ready as I'll ever be.
All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Tactical Baby Gear podcast. It's been a while, obviously, as you can tell. Real quick, new channel. Hopefully, you should be watching this on the new YouTube channel. This is dedicated specifically to the podcast. We've moved it off the main channel, so there's now this separate TBG podcast YouTube channel. So you're probably not subscribed yet, so make sure you hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. We got J-Dog in the house today.
Oh, yeah.
AKA Jaidyn Johnson. Although your last name's going to change here soon, huh?
Soon, less than a month.
Oh, man.
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z? Are you joking me?
I swear to God.
That's amazing.
I know.
Awesome. Listen, I tried to woo a girl at a party with my extensive knowledge of the Titanic, but she didn't seem interested. I guess it wasn't a good icebreaker.
That's a good one.
That's pretty bad, wasn't it? The Titanic and breaking ice. J-Dog, what's up?
Let's break the ice here.
Yeah, we're breaking the ice.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm super excited to have you here. This has been a long time coming. We've been working on this since July.
Yeah. Ever since I slid into the DMs of Tactical Baby Gear, it's been in the works.
Yeah. And I don't know what made... we get a million DMs, as you can imagine.
I bet.
And I can't remember exactly what your DMs... Do you remember what your DM was to us specifically? It was something about what you do, and we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
And I was like, that sounds interesting. And I was on vacation. I was down in the Keys. I was in an RV. And something just made me be like, yeah, I need to talk to this girl.
I'm glad.
Usually that's not the case. I'm like, I get 1,000 of these a day. And I'm like, I don't have time for this.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'm glad we got on the phone. We made that happen. I was like, I got to do something with this girl. She's awesome. She knows her stuff. This is valuable information for the people to hear. So anyways, we made it happen.
Yeah. I love what you guys are doing. So
Thank you.
I'm happy to be
I appreciate it.
part of the cause.
Yeah. All right. So give us the backstory. Give us a little bit of who you are, what you do, why you're here, and what we're going to be talking about.
Okay. So my name is Jaden, as you mentioned. I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. And from there, I went to Cornell and studied human development. After that, I went to St. Louis, where I studied occupational therapy. And since then, I've been working in pediatrics, more recently specializing in early intervention. So that's babies birth to 3. So I do a lot of coaching with parents, a lot of that work, which I really love. And that's kind of what has led me to being particularly interested in what you all are doing with working with babies. Personally, your guys' mission and brand means a lot to me too. We had talked about this a little bit before, but I actually grew up without ever knowing who my dad was. I met him when I was 25. So
Wow.
It's a big piece in my heart to kind of use my story and my knowledge and how I can help promote dads being involved and just promote that world of dads in their babies' lives. So knowing that you guys are working towards that mission is super awesome, and I'm happy to be a part of that.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. You sound very smart, and I'm starting to feel dumb sitting here across the table from you.
I feel a little imposter syndrome, I'll be honest. So
no, come on. So occupational therapy, can you give us what does that mean exactly? And then you're applying that to children.
Yeah. It's confusing because occupational therapy, you're like, well, kids don't have jobs. So the reason why it's called occupational therapy is because we're looking at people's occupations, their day-to-day routines, right? What activities do people want and need to do throughout the day? So for adults, you've got a million things, whether it be waking up and brushing your teeth, getting dressed, going to work, running your business. For kids, their occupation is typically learning and playing. And so
I need that job again.
Therapy, I know. I want to be a kid. I want to be an infant.
Right.
So for them, we're looking at how we can help them engage in their occupations. And in occupational therapy, we're looking at, is there some sort of barrier that might be limiting someone's performance in their day-to-day occupations, right? So is it a certain diagnosis? Is it muscle weakness? Is it challenges with executive functioning, right? What might be something that's posing a barrier? And then as occupational therapists, how can we use our lens, kind of looking at the whole person and help them do different tasks, right? So we're making interventions or coaching strategies to help get them to where they want or need to be.
Right. So in these early childhood years, like you mentioned, from newborn to 3, you guys are really focused on particular milestones, right? Like, for example, rolling over, crawling, walking. I think you mentioned to me crawling. Did someone mention to me crawling is not like a milestone anymore? Did you?
I guess it's not. Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. They redid the milestones with the CDC.
Can you name off a few of these milestones to help everyone understand like the things that we're talking about?
Yes. So when we're talking about milestones, these are different skills that your baby's going to develop in a general trajectory, right? So first, they're going to tolerate time on their tummy. Then, we're moving through different things like pushing up on their arms on their tummy. We're looking at, are they rolling over? Are they crawling? Are they walking? Those are some of the gross motor milestones. And then, of course, we have different categories, right? So fine motor milestones, are they starting to kind of bat at toys? Then are they grabbing for them and eventually getting more precision with picking up little pieces of cereal? The social milestones, right? And some of those communication things. So there's a big wide array and a bunch of things, but that's kind of the general idea of these milestones.
Got it. I want to circle back a little bit. I'm going to bounce around a little bit, so you guys bear with me here. There's a few things that I want to touch on. I want to make sure that this is listened to by everybody, is particularly the dads. And as you mentioned, you grew up in a house without a dad, and I want to hear more about that. And I think I want to circle back to why I think it's important for dads to really pay attention to what you have to say and why it matters, in the fact that they need to understand it so they can support mom when mom's trying to do this thing because she read it on some mommy blog, and we don't have daddy blogs. We have TBG podcasts. So, let's take a step back before we go deep diving into the occupational therapy stuff and the milestones and how to reach those and how you approach that. Growing up not knowing your dad, was that a big weight for you, or was it a confusion? Like, at what point in your life were you like, wait a minute, I don't have a dad. Like, all your friends have dads, and there's the home dynamic is different. Mm-hmm. What was that like?
It was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because looking back at it now as an adult, I have a different lens on it, especially being in my industry, looking at like, oh my gosh, look at all these things that I missed out on. I always knew, I was missing that piece, and I had
like always, or was there like an age, like kindergarten, first grade, when you're 5, 6, 7 years old, you're like, wait a minute. Or do you feel like it was like, what are your early memories of this? Do you know?
Yeah. So I'll spare how much I really get into like the nitty gritty details, but my sister's dad was in my life when I was young.
So your mom remarried or something? Okay.
Yep. And when they got a divorce, I kind of then processed like, I don't know who my dad is. He's not in my life, and it's not possible for me to meet him. So, and I was little, like I did not know how to process that at all. I think as I got older, it started to kind of eat at me more. Particularly, I remember my 18th birthday and everyone's like, you're not a child anymore. And I remember thinking, oh, dang, like I really went through my whole childhood without having my dad. Mm-hmm. And just due to the circumstances, it just was not possible for me to know him. I didn't know who he was. So that was interesting. I remember wondering, like the mind can wander of
course,
who it could be or what is this man like.
Did you talk to your mom about this over the years?
Yes. And she's great. She did everything she could to support me, and she did the best she could. And it's just due to the circumstances, It was impossible to know who he was. And it's a happy ending, spoiler alert. I should have started with that.
Well, you said you met him when you were 25.
Yes. He's amazing. It's been really, really great. But I actually found him through 23andMe, which is wild. Not him directly, but that kind of led to some puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And
you were on the investigator route.
Oh yeah. Honestly, in another world, I could be a PI.
I think most women could. I've seen my wife do some things and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah. You're like, how did you just do that?
Can't hide anything from you.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's been good now.
Yeah.
Really.
Has that helped put your mind at ease about your childhood or anything? Or do you have resentment around that, or anger issues with your mom? Did she like keep him from you? Was there any of that kind of stuff? Good question.
My mom was doing the best she could. And I think it's natural for me to have a lot of feelings about all of it. Just because I feel like I really missed out on a lot.
Yeah.
So that's something I'm working through, and I love my mom dearly. She did the best.
Yeah.
It's been a lot to work through, just thinking about all of that I missed out on. But I try to be positive about it, and I try to think of like, I can't control why this happened to me and why I grew up this way, but what can I make of it, And
well, now you can control what you can control, right? Like you weren't in control of any of that. You're at a point now where you can control it, and you took it into your own control. You found Dad.
I did.
And you're like, damn it.
It's like, here I am.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, good for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You told me a little bit of that story before, and I know that led to some other things that you mentioned to me about like the benefits of a lot of the roughhousing dads do with their kids and throwing them around, not in a bad way, obviously, but like tossing them around and having that sort of roughhousing thing because it helps develop, well, I'll let you explain like how it developed. You develop body awareness and balance and, all these vestibular things, right?
Wow. Yeah. I'm impressed with the terms.
I know I'm pretty good. I'm way smarter than I look. Not really. I only know the vestibular thing because my dog has vestibular disease and his inner ear is all, he walks around like a drunk raccoon. He's just like all over the place. Poor guy.
Oh,
but, that's the only reason I know that word. Otherwise I'd be way over my head.
Yeah.
Let's get into a little bit of that.
Yeah. So, like you said, due to kind of my background and growing up, I've been really interested in what role do dads play with their kids, right? So I knew from an early age, like I'm kind of missing something here. And now that I'm older, and especially being in my industry and my fields, I see a lot about what are the benefits of dads being involved. And there's some research showing that dads are much more likely to help their kids engage in what we would call risky play, right?
Ooh, I like it.
Like take more risks, explore more. I'm sure the way that you play with your daughter when you all are out at the beach is different than your wife might. And, of course, I'm not going to be like too stereotypical there, but you can imagine that there's differences in the way that fathers play with their kids and mothers do. And there's benefits in the way that fathers play with them, right? So when we're roughhousing, it's super great for kids in a safe way, right? We're not too crazy. But what it does is it helps them develop this sense of body awareness, right? They're figuring out how their body's moving in space, figuring out the way that their muscles are working, their balance, like you said.
How to brace themselves, maybe.
Yeah. The vestibular processing, right? How their head's moving through space. We're working on motor planning, even just like the cognitive and social emotional piece of risk taking, right? Or knowing like I can do these hard things and my dad's here to support me. So I think it's interesting because oftentimes they'll be like, oh, stop being so rough. But in moderation and in a safe way, that type of play is really, really great for kids.
I've seen it progress in my youngest daughter, who's now 17 months. I used to, of course, me being dad and the risky play, take him, throw him up in the air, and she was not having it. That would like send her over the edge, screaming, crying. I'm like, oh God, I just broke the baby. She's so upset right now. It'd take a while to like calm him down. And then like a month goes by and you're like, let me see if I can try this again. Cause we got to throw babies in the air, right?
Gotta get the pick.
Yeah. And now she's starting to like smile and she's like, okay, this is cool. I'm used to this. This is fun. And even slides at the playground. She was like, whoa, this is weird. I don't like this. And now she's like, I want to go again. So it's like repetition and she's like getting used to it. Cause those first few times, you're like it's freaking you out. You know what I mean? As a baby, I can only imagine like how that goes. But I feel like my other kids were into it like immediately. They were like, that was cool. Let's do that again, more. You're like, one more time again. Yeah.
And you're like, this is a workout for me. I'm tired.
Yeah. It's like, no wonder I have shoulder issues now.
Yeah. It's different for each kid though.
Yeah.
And I like that you talked about like kind of slowly warming up to it. Like I have some kids will work on riding their little tricycle. And at first they're absolutely terrified. They want nothing to do with it. And I actually worked with a child where we were riding the tricycle, but it was his doll riding it and he was pushing it. And then he was like acting out what would happen when his doll fell off. And like the language the parents were using of, oh, you know, it's okay if we fall off, like we can get back on and try again. And sure enough, a week later, they're like, oh yeah, he loves his tricycle. He's riding it all the time. And that's an example of a kid who just needs like a little bit more support, coaching, right? Some kids are observers at first. They like to figure out what's going on before they'll jump in. And some kids are like, that's it, I'm jumping in. I don't care what happens.
Yeah.
And part of that's just personality that you see even in adults too.
Right. So you talked about the significance of tummy time and how important that is. And that's like such a foundational thing that kind of sets you up for the rest of your life in a way. Talk us through some of that. And I have some follow-up questions around some of these milestones, but talk us through like tummy time and why everybody reads tummy time and why mom's doing it and dad's like, whatever, I don't know, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're just laying on a mat, you know?
Yeah. It looks easy. It's fine.
Yeah. Like, cool. They sat on their belly, whatever.
Yeah. I do tummy time all the time.
Yeah. So do I. It's great.
Yeah. So tummy time is awesome. And to preface though too, it's not the end all be all, right? Ultimately, we want the baby to be able to be in a variety of different positions. And we want time on the floor where they can explore and move around, figure out how their body's working, how their muscles are working together.
And tummy time is really like a means to something else, is it not? I mean, it's kind of like practicing for the other things.
Yes.
It's
so
building a foundation.
Yep. All these skills build on each other. So the way that babies are developing, right? The first thing that they're developing is really that head control, right? So let's say a baby's on their tummy. The first thing that they've got to be able to do is like turn their head to open up their airway, right? So they've got to be able to move side to side. Then, and that's working with gravity for the most part, right? Then it's like, okay, can they lift their head up against gravity? That's a step harder. Then it's like, okay, they've got their head figured out. Can they tuck their arms and start to push off? Then once they figure that out, okay, can they transfer their weight? Can they start to reach for toys? Then by being able to do that, can they roll over? And then by rolling, what does that lead to, right? And then we get to crawling and sitting and pulling to stand and all of those other things. You can see how these milestones all kind of build on each other. And I'm a massive human development nerd. I think it's so cool the way that it progresses. And I could go into much more detail, but in general, yeah, these milestones are important because they lay this foundation for later movements and activities.
What further detail are you talking about? Like how nerdy are we talking? Let's go nerdy for a minute.
You want to go nerdy?
Yeah, let's hear. That's the good stuff.
Okay, I'm trying to think. Like what more do you want to know about it?
Well,
right?
I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. Right. So you know, when you talk about, we could go into greater detail about why it's important to be pushing up or sitting up, or tummy time leading to standing, which leads to walking. Are there like points in there that you're like, is there some nerd information in there?
Well, okay. So think about when kids are on their tummy and they're pushing through their arms, right? It's helping them get to the next skill, which is shifting their weight and then rolling, but it's also developing the strength like in their shoulder girdle, right? It's developing strength in their arms by pushing through their hands and bearing weight. It's helping to develop the arches in their hands that then later lays the foundation for more fine motor skills, right? So sometimes when kiddos have a really hard time with fine motor skills, we'll do weight-bearing activities, right? So we'll put them in a crawling position and we'll do an obstacle course because we know that that's going to help to work on those fine motor skills by strengthening, and that carries over into more.
Yeah, here's another one. I think I told you the story before. I've got a friend of mine who like skipped crawling. He went straight to walking. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think the whole crawling not being a milestone is kind of interesting, most kids are going to do it anyways, just because it's like sort of intuitive that you're going to get to that phase where you're going to scoot or something before you're walking. Very few kids skip that altogether. It's just going to happen. But he skipped crawling and went straight to walking. And when he was walking and someone would call his name, he would like physically turn around to address that person or whoever was calling his name. And he was like 8 when a teacher or somebody sort of picked up on the fact that like he didn't turn his neck to look. He would like turn around, and they figured it out that he skips crawling. And when the kids are crawling, they kind of develop that look around skill, I guess you call it, right? And he skipped that altogether. So his like instinct is just turn around. And so I guess a doctor, or maybe it was an occupational therapist or something, when he's like 8, suggests that he starts crawling around the house. Yeah. So to develop this like neck looking around skill. So his mom's got him crawling around the house. His dad comes home. He's like, "Get off the ground. You look like an idiot."
What are you doing?
But I thought it was so funny. But then it's like, I see that's like a real life example of like, if you don't do a certain thing now, he's perfectly fine now. Right. But it's like, what's the consequence that he didn't turn his neck when he was 8? Probably nothing. Like everything's fine. Right. And that leads to sort of this follow-up question too of if they don't hit some of these milestones that we're talking about at the time that the doctors want to see it happen, you go into your 1-year checkup or you go to your 6-month checkup and they ask you the laundry list of questions of, are they doing this yet? Are they doing that yet? How many times do they go to the bathroom? Da, 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 da. And you're like, I don't know. I haven't slept in like 2 weeks. I don't know what's going on.
Right.
Which is why I suggest that all these parents carry a little notepad in their diaper bag. Like, write stuff down because you'll forget. You're so sleep deprived. You're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't even know what day is it? I don't know.
I don't know if I'm coming or going.
Their birthday? I have no idea. But what are the consequences if they don't hit some of these milestones? Are there consequences, or is it just like an advantage if they do? Or is it both? It depends.
It's a good question. So thinking about why we have these milestones and why, when you go to the doctor or you're looking at resources where it shows this trajectory, why, right? They're shown in that order because that's typically how the human body develops, right? So like I said, if it marks a certain time and you're like, oh my God, my baby was supposed to do this milestone at this month and they're not doing it. Okay, sometimes there's give and take, right? No child is the same. I always like to say that development is like a spiral, right? It's not linear. There's going to be ebbs and flows, and every child has a unique way that they're developing. But it's important that we have this general trajectory that we can refer to so we know what's coming, right? And how these skills are building on each other. So if you're at a point where you're like, okay, my kid I've got a gut feeling, they haven't been meeting some of their milestones by a couple months, something feels off, then it's important to work with a professional, right? So you're consulting your pediatrician or your early intervention program to figure out why, right? Because sometimes if children aren't meeting their milestones and
like regularly, if they're constantly behind.
Yeah, sometimes there's something else that might be going on, right? Is it that, maybe they have a specific diagnosis, or maybe there's some differences in the left or the right side of their body, or
maybe mom and dad aren't helping do anything and they're being lazy.
I don't know.
No? Come on.
I wouldn't say, okay, everyone's doing the best they can, right? There are
not always. No, I've seen some lazy ones out there. We can't have lazy parents. Yeah. Like, I'm going to be the hard one on that. Like, there's a lot of parents who are like, whatever, they'll figure it out. Like, no, it is your job to help them do these things. You can't, and they're not going to do it on their own.
Yeah.
It's a reason like that we're having this conversation to encourage parents to do the tummy time, because if you don't, they're going to be late doing other things, which leads to another thing, which is just like compounds.
Yeah. And it's a fine line too of like, we have access to all this information about child development, right? Like you could scroll on Instagram or blogs or websites through the CDC or all these different organizations, and it's all in your face of here's how your baby should be developing. Here's what you should do with your child.
You start to feel bad about it too.
Exactly. And that's what we don't want either, right? So how as parents can we take this information in, being mindful and intuitive about it and using it as a resource and a tool rather than like just feeling like we're in a constant flux of information and feeling like we're behind and not doing enough.
I know.
Right?
I felt like that recently because everyone was asking me if my daughter was walking yet. And she was like 12 or 13 months old. I'm like, is she walking yet? And I'm like, no, not yet. But she's like, she'll pull up, stand up on the couch and kind of cruise down the couch a little bit or whatever. But she just like, you try to get her to take a step and she's like straight to the floor and she's like, nope. So anyways, people ask, is she walking yet? Is she walking yet? You're like, no. And then you're like, man, is she like really behind? Should she be walking? I feel like everyone's asking if she's walking. She's not walking. Like is there something wrong? And you're like, no, everything's fine.
Yeah, you start to panic because you get all these voices and it's like, it's nice that you've got access to all this information, but I think it's important
it's overwhelming.
To consume it responsibly.
Sure. Well, and that's the same thing with pregnant women, poor women. Gosh, you read stuff on the internet and you're like starting to self-diagnose and you're like, oh God, everything's terrible,
Yeah.
And everything's fine.
Yeah. That's with anything though,
It is. It is anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like you start typing in a symptom into Google or WebMD or something, suddenly you've got like the worst thing ever. And you're like, it's like, no, you were just constipated or something. It's like really not that big of a deal.
It's small.
But the walking thing was crazy. And she's still, she can walk and she does from time to time, but she much rather just be crawling. She's like so much faster. And we've certainly anticipated that she would have been walking sooner because she has two older sisters, that are 11 and 8. And they're just like cruise. I mean, that was the same thing with our first daughter, right? She didn't walk until about 13 months. It was like right at 13 months. You're like, okay, cool, whatever. And then our second daughter was a bit sooner than that. We're like, well, she wants to keep up with her sister. Of course she's walking. So we're like, oh, Hannah's going to be walking at like 9 months. You kidding me? Not even close.
Yeah.
Like she's 17 months now and still like, you're lucky to get her to walk. And now I'm like forcing it on her, like really forcing it. We walk into daycare. I'm not carrying her. I'm like, I'm putting you on the ground and I'm going to make you stand up and we're going to walk and she's going to take 5 steps and be like, no. And she's going to go down to the ground and want to crawl. And I'm going to pick her right back up. And like, this is how it's been for the last several weeks. Cause I'm like, you have shoes on for a reason.
Does she? So she can take like 5 steps?
Oh yeah. She just doesn't want to.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm way faster on my knees, Dad.
Yeah.
Like, this is so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's because of the sisters. If she's like, I want to be able to keep up as fast as possible. This is like really slow process. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard.
So like in that circumstance with that, what is a good approach for me to take with that and like trying to help her walk more efficiently, give her that confidence that like you can.
Yeah. So I would look at where she's at, right? And is it that it's really hard for her? Again, like I don't know her. I've never laid eyes on her, but was she slower in meeting other milestones that there could be something like underlying that's making it tricky? Is it just like she just needs more opportunities to play, right? And like play in that position. So maybe it's adding in opportunities for kids to work on cruising more, right? So you're playing with her favorite toy and you pop it up and to get the pieces, she's got to cruise left to right along the couch and working on that confidence there and just getting some of those repetitions in those skills, right? So looking at what are these foundations that she needs to build in order to get there? And being mindful of like, if you and your gut are like, oh, like she still feels like it's hard for some reason, then, getting a professional to kind of help you lay eyes on like, maybe it's tricky for her for a particular reason. Maybe it's just a matter of she just needs more time, right? And kids develop at different paces with different opportunities too. But I know it can be stressful because it's like,
I mean, I'm not worried. Again, it's not like I'm always like, well, she's not going to go to college crawling around, but it'd be nice if she was walking for many reasons. It's like a convenience factor for one, because my back has about had it. Like I'm getting old here, people. And then even at daycare, like it was interesting because when we finally got her into daycare, my wife was staying at home with her and now she's like, I just need a couple days. So it was like 2 days a week for a few hours. It was like, give mom a break. She can go to the grocery store. She can get her hair done or nail, whatever. She take a nice shower, whatever, right? Give her a break. And, she was 16 months when she went in, and they're like, well, we've got room in this toddler room, and it was like a bunch of 2-year-olds. And I was like, I don't know. Like I don't know if that's the right room for her, but if they got room for her, then I'll take her. Like, I'll drop her off, it's only a couple hours. And they quickly moved her. They were like, yeah, she's not ready for this room. I was like, I could have told you that. So they moved her into another room with more babies and more kids. And to their defense, I think that the baby room was supposed to be more like newborns and like 6-month-old babies. And then the other room was supposed to be more kids her age. And it kind of ended up not so much like that once they got all the kids in the classes. So whatever. But yeah, I mean, the other kids were running around the playground and going down slides, and she like is crawling around, can't get around on her own. I think the teachers are like,
something.
I think she's ready for this classroom here.
Yeah.
Talking is another one. Do you deal with talking much? Is that like
well, it's interesting because in like the early intervention model, right? So early intervention is, you can go through your state's program and get an assessment and evaluation. And if your child qualifies, right, if they have a delay or a specific diagnosis, depending on the state, it's different all around. But then you can get early intervention services, right? So you get a document. It's called an IFSP. It's like an individualized family plan of like, hey, here's an assessment of your child. Here's what they're doing. Here's what's going really well. Here's what they like. Here's what's challenging. Here are the goals of the family. So it's very family centered. And the early intervention models differ in that in some places they use a model where there's one primary provider, right? So this child might have goals that are related to communication and gross motor skills and feeding. But then there's an interdisciplinary team behind it, right? So there's a PT, a speech therapist, all of that jazz. But then it might be just an OT who is the primary provider for that family, helping them reach all their goals.
So the OT, occupational therapist, would be like the general contractor. It's like the main, like, I'm going to oversee and I'm going to bring in the PT, the physical therapist. I'm going to bring in the speech therapist, and you're like subcontracting the right people for the job.
Exactly. I can count on you to put it in the dad lingo. Yes. That's basically what it is.
Got it.
Yeah. So in that sense, I do work on communication, right? Because I have children that I work with that have goals where we're working on that. Although I am not a speech therapist, right?
But you probably have enough knowledge of each one of these things to maybe test a few things on your own to be like, okay, this is what we need to do.
Yeah.
We need a speech therapist.
Exactly.
So you're pretty well-rounded and you're dangerous in each one of these sort of categories.
Yeah, exactly. And then knowing when like, okay, I've, pulled out my tricks in my tool bag, putting on my lens here, but I think that we could bring in the speech therapist to actually come in and provide more intensive care.
Do the thing. My daughter doesn't really care to say much. She understands a lot. Mm-hmm. She doesn't want to talk about it though. She's like, she'll just scream dad, 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 dad 100 times. And it's awesome because I'm like, yeah, she said dad first. Let's point for me.
Classic.
But then now I think she just makes the sound and it sounds like she's saying dad. And I think my wife's picking up on that. She's like, yeah, she's not saying dad. She's just making noise and it sounds like dad.
Mama, please.
But she understands a lot, but you can't get her to say anything. Yeah. She screams and makes she's speaking her own language, just like baby language, just mumbling all kinds of sounds. And she's having a conversation with herself, but it's none of the words we're trying to get her to say at all. She's obsessed with hats. Hat and keys are my first words. And I'm still obsessed with both. And
keys.
Yeah.
That's so random.
I know. I don't know. But if I say hat, like she's like straight looking at my head and she grabs the hat off of it and she'll rip it off and then she'll whack it right back onto my head and she wants me to put it back on and it's like, ow, that hurt, and she's obsessed. She knows exactly what the hat is. Bath. If you say, like when we're wrapping up dinner time and you're like, you ready to take a bath? She's like fussing and she wants out of the high chair and you put her down. Of course, she's crawling. She's like, gone straight to the bathroom. Also, I'm like, well, hold on a minute. I'm trying to clean up this other stuff.
It's nice that she likes bath time because some kids are like, nope.
She loves bath time. And that's stressful for me. Kids in water freak me out. Like so many babies drown. And I I don't think she's going to have a problem because I'm like such a like worrier about it, you know, and I'm not like leaving her unattended by any means. And as she's gotten older, more capable, it's like the water level goes up and up. And now she just like, she likes this one green cup in the bathtub and she likes to fill it up and dump it out. And recently she's like dumping it out outside the tub and it's like all over the floor. And I'm like, oh God.
Oh yeah. Cause she's figuring out cause and effect, right? She's figuring out how gravity works. And then
but she likes to stand up in the bathtub. Oh, food on the listen, throwing food around the house is her favorite activity.
That's some drama. I hear that all the time.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I mean, the dog is eating great right now. Hans had Chick-fil-A last night.
Good for him. He deserves it.
You know, him and his vestibular disease. He's
the
like
backbone of that family.
Wobbling his way to the Chick-fil-A on the floor. And
You're
some
relying
mac and
on
cheese.
the scent.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, he can't hear much. He's 14. He's old. So on top of like his wobbly, he's super old. His hips are giving out. So he's like a poor guy.
Oh.
He's like a drunk sailor. He's just all over the place.
What kind of dog is he?
German Shepherd. Yeah. So anyways, the dog is eating great. When she's done eating, she's like trying to shove the plate off of her high chair, throw it on the ground, just get it out of her face. She doesn't want anything else to do with it when she's done. And that's it.
Yep.
And then recently, you can't just put food on like the tray of the high chair anymore. She wants the container. I want to pick it out of the container myself. I don't want you to put it on the tray for me to eat. She's got really good fine motor skills. Like she'll pick up individual Cheerios and she's really good with that. And she loves raspberries. She will be raspberry after raspberry. And we go through so many raspberries in my house.
I love raspberries.
Travis, when we're doing all the photo shoots and stuff, like I have to have like this huge thing of raspberries to keep her like chill so we can get the photos we need. And we were doing all this stroller content and she's just like freaking out in the middle of the shot.
Just have a raspberry, sweetie.
And I'm like trying to give her 6 and like by the time she's eating, we're like, all right, get the photo quick. And then she's like, wah! But the other day she wanted some strawberries out of the bowl. And I like put the bowl over there. And it's a glass bowl too. So I was like, all right, I got to be careful with this one. And she goes to like grab a strawberry out of it and she whack. And it hit the floor and like exploded. I'm like,
no.
So then I'm trying to keep the drunk dog out of the glass. She's like freaking out. I'm on my hands and knees. It's like, I'm trying to get this cleaned up because I got to get the other kids to school. And I mean, it was a whole thing. I was like, oh my God. Throwing food is her favorite activity.
Yep. Your child and many others.
Ugh.
And part of it is them communicating like, hey, I want to be done. Right. And when they don't have the words,
if they would use their words that we're trying to teach her, like done or finished. Sign language. You ever do sign language?
Yeah.
I'm obsessed.
Yeah. Do you work on like all done, sign more, language.
All those? More is like the one saving grace that like all of our kids learned. And they're like, all right, they're hungry.
Yeah.
Like that was the only one we could really get the stick. Oh, let's go down let's talk about sign language. I'm obsessed. I think it's the greatest thing in the world.
Great. To preface, I'm not a speech therapist, but I know.
But you know enough to like, this is a great topic.
Yeah. Let's chat.
So the idea sounded crazy to me. My older brother did it with his kids. And when we had our first daughter, he was like, oh, you got to watch Signing Time. Signing Time with Allie and what was Signing Time was the first one. And this is going back, 10, 12 years. And we would put it on and Cameron learned food more and maybe done or something. Like where's the 3? And it was like, that was enough for us to not be frustrated and pissed off and like, what does she want? You're like, oh, she wants more food. Got it. Like, here's a whatever snack. That was incredible. So then we did it again with Kendall and she did the same thing. It was like more and maybe one other one. And we didn't really push it because like, usually that's the case. They're like, kids only cry for like 3 reasons. They're either tired, they got a dirty diaper, or they're hungry. Right. And it's like, you can eliminate the food one. You can figure out if they have a dirty diaper and it's like process of elimination, right? So it's like,
she's tired.
All right. She's tired. She's not full. She'll get a clean diaper. She needs a nap. So that was huge for us. And then, so we did it again this time and we just taught it to her. There was no videos we watched or anything. And we just taught her a couple of those and more was really the only one that stuck. And again, it was a saving grace, but I thought the idea was crazy. I was like, Mike, what kind of kid learns sign language? But then you realize Well, this is way easier for a baby to do and to communicate with their hands, a simple, like a gross motor skill, versus like language.
Yeah.
So it made total sense. And they clearly can learn it by like 8 months. They're like doing stuff, or maybe even sooner. I don't know. But I mean, you see kids in pools like at 6, 8, 9 months, like rolling over and getting to a net. Like they can learn how to do this. It's crazy.
Yeah. And thinking about just those imitation skills, right? Those are huge because they're learning to do it by imitating.
They're watching,
doing it. And that's why things like, nursery songs or doing the wheels on the bus or Itsy Bitsy Spider, like those seem so silly, I haven't done that in a long time. But they're good because what you're working on is that foundational skill of like, can your child imitate those gestures, right? And those are kind of the foundation.
Kids are parents. They will imitate mom and dad for the rest of their lives, which is why it's so important parents you just have to remember that they are watching everything you do. Good, bad, and it does, like they're watching everything and they want to be you.
Yeah.
So you better be a good role model, is what I'm trying to say. Be a good role model because they're going to imitate mom and dad. Yeah, period.
Absolutely. You're their world, you are what they know. And that's where they're learning all their skills. It's where they're learning their beliefs, the way that they handle problems, the way that they're managing their emotions. Like it goes deeper than even just imitating the wheels on the bus, right? They're copying everything.
Their little boys are going to copy their dad and how they treat their wives. Totally. My kids are going to watch the way I'm treating my wife, and that is going to be the standard in which they judge men. I hope, and that's how I live. Is that I hope that I can create a really hard time for some little boy because my kids are going to have really high standards.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to create better men. I think if we continue to move that cycle and generation after generation of like, this is the standard, and keep raising that bar and create better people, men, women. Like if women have higher standards, guess what? They control everything. Women have the power.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do.
So if the woman wants a better man, we're going to have better men.
You're going to have to rise up.
I'm sorry. That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
Women have the power. So.
Amen.
Damn it.
It's crazy though, because even just thinking about the role of dads in child development, like there's studies showing that the more that a dad is involved and is active and intentional, right? There's better outcomes for cognitive skills or like peer-to-peer interactions, emotional skills, math skills, verbal skills. Like there's a ton of research on how a dad being involved is impacting child's development when they're younger. Even like infant sleep outcomes are better when dad's involved.
Not my infant. That she won't sleep. I'm literally like half dead right now.
You need some of the
I need some of our coffee.
Water.
Yeah. I'm just going to start chewing on coffee beans.
Just swallow it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's studies that show that.
Yeah. I have a list of like some research. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, go for it. Pull it up.
Yeah, it's wild.
That is interesting. Like I know that there's studies out there that show like, children that grow up in a house without a father are more likely to go to prison and things like that, right? I know that those stuff, and I should probably study that stuff more and have the information on that, but I don't.
I actually have a handout that I printed that explains it pretty well.
Really?
I'll grab it in a minute. Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of research on it. I was actually digging around and the 2021 census. So they were saying that 19 million children living with single parent households. So that's 1 in 4 kids, which is wild.
I wonder how many of those are at least have their dad, like have split custody or something, right? Where they go to their dads on the weekends or whatever. And why is it always like that? It's like mom always, sorry, not to like, mom always gets the kid and dad gets the shaft. I feel like always. It's like my brother, for example, my older brother got divorced. He's got 2 kids. And then his wife has 2 kids. They have 4 kids. They're a split family, blended family, I should say. And he gets his kids every other weekend. So 30 days in a month, he sees them for 4.
Wow.
And that's like normal for a lot of families. And I think it's screwy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, of course, it depends on each scenario, right?
It does. It does. But it's like every other weekend, I think it's crazy.
Yeah. That's reminding me of one of the things I was reading in the research, though, was talking about how in a study they were finding that the quality of the time with the dad is just as important as the quantity, right? So in that sense, like from a hopeful lens of like, can we make that time really, really rich and filled with good connection and opportunities? And that can kind of buffer those effects of, dad not being around as much. And I think that's really important too, of like how.
That's true, because there's plenty of dads who are at home, but not really. It goes back to being like present.
Yeah. And that's where the research gets kind of messy, right? Because we can spew all these facts of like, oh, there's this many households of single moms, or, this many kids who live with a single parent. But it's like, that doesn't tell us the detail, right? Of, well, how often are they seeing their dad? And every family is different. They've all got different dynamics of who their caregiver is and what role, right? But it's interesting to think about the impact of that.
So that study was 19 million. It was like 1 in 4 families or 1 in 4 kids is in a home without a father.
So that's from the 2021 census. But yeah, 19 million children living with single parent households. And there's 74 million kids in the USA. I think that's the number I found. Again, don't quote me too much, but point being, there's a significant amount of kids in the US that are living with a single parent.
Yeah.
And the majority of those
tough.
Are kids living with their mom. I think it's like, what did I see? I don't have the stat here, but the majority of the kids living with single parents are living with their mom.
With their mom.
Yeah.
Rather than with the dad.
Yep. And then there's all the layers of that too, right? Like having a single parent, how does that impact like with, how likely are they to be in poverty, right? With having 1 income versus 2. And what does that do to the mix?
Dynamic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and social skills and the dynamic of friends and school and things like that. All of that.
Yeah.
Plays a part,
Yep. Even just like the mental health of the parent who is, the primary caregiver.
Yeah, the single mom
time, right? Like
got 1, 2, 3 kids, single mom.
Stressed out of her freaking mind.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I mean, it's hard enough a lot of times having both parents at home, let alone I got a lot of respect for single parents out there, and I wish it wasn't the case for them. And it's becoming more and more normal.
Yeah. I think about my mom and I'm like, dang, I don't know how she did that.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's tough. And I don't have kids yet.
You have a sister, right?
I do have a sister.
And just one sister?
Well, yes, I grew up with a sister. And then when I found my dad, I actually have 2 other siblings.
Oh.
Yeah. So one just graduated high school and one is in high school. So
a little younger.
Yeah. It's been interesting. They're great. But, I've got to think about from their perspective too, how weird that they're just like going to hockey practice and they're like, hey, by the way, you have an older sister, which is wild.
That's crazy. And those are boys?
No, 1 boy and 1 girl.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah. I can't imagine if my mom was like a single mom with the 3 boys, right? I mean, our house was chaos already. And then you got my dad coming in like thunder voice. Like I was terrified. Trav, were you scared of dad?
Yeah, at times. I mean, so to give you some background, like our dad was like a black belt Taekwondo instructor, big guy, my size, big guy.
6'2". Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not
like the fear
nice
of
guy.
God. Super nice. Everybody loves
amazing
him.
Guy. Yeah.
You're like, I'm not going to mess with him.
He wasn't like, he's not like going to beat you, but like he was like the fear of God that if you did anything wrong, that was it. Like game over.
Oof.
So we were pretty well behaved. I mean, we had our moments for sure. Like, and our older brother's quite the instigator.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. He'd like to
you
stir
guys
it
have
up.
nothing to blame for it.
I stayed out of it. It was Matt and Travis.
I'm the youngest, so I got picked on the most. And our older brother, he's the oldest. I'm the youngest. I got it the worst.
7 years between them.
Yeah.
Convenient that you guys are pinning him and he's not here.
No.
Oh, he knows.
He's very aware.
There's a podcast episode
listening right now.
Oh yeah.
He would like stir it up and just like step back and like watch it all play out. He's 5 years older than me. So he was a little smarter. He was a little, he's like 10 and we're like 5 and 3, and he's just like, watch this.
He's like, I know something you guys don't yet.
Oh yeah. Punk.
Yeah. Mom was a pretty good enforcer too, though. Most of the punishment.
How do you know?
Huh? Listen.
The angel child.
No, there a lot of spankings and a lot of the discipline came from mom.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Yeah. The fear was from dad, but the actual the
follow through
discipline and the
she had 3 boys. She had to be. You can't.
She laid it down.
Travis had a poor Travis had a wooden spoon broken right over his butt.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Cameron and Kendall love that story, by the way.
Do they?
Oh yeah.
It's funny.
They're obsessed with it.
Oof.
He was bad.
Yeah.
Turn it around though.
I was trying to keep up with older brothers. I had to flex some muscle,
Yeah.
And then I got bigger than them and it kind of settled down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Showed him who's boss. What is it like for you now you have all girls,
3
correct?
girls.
And you grew up in a household of all boys.
I was terrified. I'm just like, oh my God, I don't know if I can handle girls, but I'm thankful to have girls because again, I think I want to leave the world a better place than when I found it. You know what I mean? Like I want to make an impact, a positive impact on the world. And I think, the influence and the audience we have with Tactical Baby Gear and what we can do to kind of persuade or encourage, I don't say persuade, but encourage parents to be better for their kids. But then knowing that women hold the power, if I can make my kids have a higher standard, it'll force other people to have a higher standard. So it's like a double whammy. So I get to like do better in multiple ways that way. And then after having 2 girls and on the 3rd go around, I was like, oh, please be a boy, please be a boy, please be a boy. And it was another girl. But then I was kind of relieved, actually.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, you know what? I already know how this goes. I know what to expect. I know I'm an awesome girl dad. They love me. And my wife is like terrified of having a boy. She's like, I don't know what to do with a boy. I don't know how to deal with this boy, and she wouldn't have done well at all. Aww. So yeah, 3 girls it's a challenge. And now my oldest is 11 and she started middle school this year. So that's been like a whole new kind of dynamic, but she's so awesome. I mean, all my kids are awesome, but she was so worried and what's really interesting to me is that leaving elementary school, there was a couple of teachers that were like, middle school is going to be so hard and the kids are so mean and there's bullies and all this stuff. So she was like really scared and terrified and had like a real issues about going to middle school because it was put into her head that it was going to be like such a negative experience.
Yeah.
And it was like, why would you making it really hard for me to get her to school on the first day of middle school. You know what I mean? Like
you're so anxious.
And that word anxious and anxiety, it gets thrown around so much in these days at those ages, and they've got lots of kids medicated with stuff that I just don't feel is necessary. You know what I mean? That it's like a lot of it we've put into their head that they should be worried about this or upset about that, and we haven't given them sort of the skills to deal with some of the pressure or the stresses or the thing, and we just chalk it up to anxiety and shove a bunch of pills down their throat and say, you have anxiety, here's how you deal with it.
Yeah.
Take this medicine. That's not the right way to do it.
I think it's so interesting because a lot of kids do have really anxious feelings, right? Like they're human, they're little body, but they're thinking things and feeling things. Yeah, but how do we teach them to manage it and how to walk through life, right? Because those feelings aren't going to go away. They're just going to get bigger as you get older.
And I think it's progressed with the whole like 8th place trophy, participation trophy, like everybody wins. You did a great job. It's like, no, you sucked. Sorry.
And how do you deal with it? You got last place. Okay, what do we do? You
cry about it and deal and like learn that you got to do better. If that's what, like that's how I take it. It's like my daughter, same way, and almost to a fault. It was sort of the the opposite extreme where she was doing gymnastics. She was really, really good at it. Second place, third place, state championships, like really, really good at gymnastics. And we were all rooting her on, and there started to be a lot more pressure on her to perform and to do well. And she was like 8 at the time.
Jeez.
And she's doing gymnastics for 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. And it was a lot. And then it was hot, and it was summertime in South Carolina. It was 110 degrees in the gym with no AC. And the coaches are all like, you got to do better. You bent your legs. And she's like, I'm tired. I'm hot.
It's like, I'm literally 8.
Yeah. And everyone's like yelling at her, and it just became not fun.
Yeah.
And it was sort of the opposite. It was like, you're doing so well. You've got to do better. You can't underperform or else. And she just quit one day. She was like, I don't want to go anymore. I'm done. Like, couple days off, you'll be back. She's like, no, it's not fun anymore. I don't want to do it. And it's like, it got ruined because of the pressure because she was so good. And I think it's the opposite of like when you're really bad at something, it's okay to get upset about it and learn that you have to do better if you want to be good at it, and not because it's a false reality. You can't be like, oh, well, you did so good and it's okay, honey, blah, blah. And then they hit the real world in a real work environment, or they go to college or whatever. And suddenly when you suck, you suck.
Yeah.
And that's then you're punched in the face even harder. You got to
figure it out alone.
Yeah. Versus like dealing with that and learning and having that foundation at a younger age that like, okay, if I'm not good at this, I have to work harder at it. And no one's going to pat you on the back later in life when you suck. Mm-hmm.
And that's where our job as...
Let them cry. I think it's really good for them to develop those emotional skills that like, cry it out. It's fine. It's totally fine to have emotions and be upset about this. Mm-hmm. That's normal.
And
I'd be upset if you didn't cry about it.
Yes. And like, how are we helping them work through that, right? Because like, it's one thing for your daughter to come home from gymnastics and cry in her room alone, right? Versus like it
hurts your heart. You don't want to see that.
Exactly. And you're helping her work through of like, man, these are some big feelings. Like, why do we feel like that? What can we make of this situation, right? What can we do moving forward? Like, you've got all these skills and like, you're really great at this, but we're working at this and we'll get better. And that's okay. And like, kids oftentimes don't have the insight and the self-regulation skills to have that awareness yet, right? Like, I can barely manage my emotions and I'm a grown adult, So looking at like, how do we expect an 8-year-old to manage her emotions on her own? Like, yes, we want to slowly grade it to where she is doing more of it on her own, but knowing that when she backs up, like, hey, mom and dad are there to support me. And like, I'm going to work through this, but I've got this security to fall back on.
Mm-hmm. One thing I've noticed that you keep saying is why. Like, that's your reaction to things is reverse engineering. It's like, okay, this is the thing, but why?
Yeah.
Why are you not crawling or walking? Why are you upset? Why? And it's like trying to reverse engineer that. I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think most people probably do that, but hearing you like say why each time has been interesting.
Yeah. I guess I do that a lot. And I think
you got to find the core of what the problem is. So it's like, why?
Yeah.
It's not that they're not walking because they're not it's like, why are you not walking yet? Why are you not talking yet? Why are you crying? Why are you upset? Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And putting like the spotlight back on the person or the baby, right? Like, how does it affect them and what they're going through? Mm-hmm. And like in my job, like, I guess it's always prioritizing like my patient, but yeah.
How often do you feel like this might sound really bad. I'm going to preface with that. And I don't want this to be taken out of context here.
I'm scared.
You shouldn't be. It's not that bad. I almost feel like your job working with kids and parents is kind of like dog trainers.
How so?
Well, it's like Travis is laughing. Well,
Travis is like, oh God.
He's like, oh God, he didn't just go there.
He's like, cut it.
I know. No, I think it's like dogs. A lot of it, I think, is reinforcing good behavior. We had a podcast guest one time who was a therapist. Not actually, he was Philip Searcy. He was he's like a social worker type of person, sort of like a therapist. Anyways, he made a big point that was like, kids need 6 positive sort of reinforcements to every 1 negative. And the premise being, if you kind of like my daughter not sleeping, she cries, or anybody's kid not sleeping or whatever, like they wake up, they're crying in the crib, you go and pick them up. Like, cool. If I cry, I get picked up. That's what I wanted to happen anyways. You're creating sort of bad behavior by doing that instead of trying to get them to go to sleep or do whatever, but rather than like reinforce the good behavior. They slept through the night, you reward them for it, or it's kind of like a dog, right? They sit, you give them a treat. They sit, you give them a treat. They don't sit, they don't get a treat. And it's like you're rewarding the good behavior creates the thing.
But then you're assuming that like a baby understands good or bad behavior.
I know. But so that's why I was like,
I get your point. And like, we want to emphasize
the good.
The good. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a side? So it's, you guys don't, in your line of work, there isn't sort of that, maybe it's not as prominent as like rewarding the good behavior versus bad behavior. And that probably doesn't work so much with milestones, but maybe it does. Like when they're learning to walk and they take a few steps, you make a big deal about it, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, ooh, that was exciting.
Yeah,
and then they continue to do it. So, I mean, you see the correlation. I'm like in my head. And then also the dog trainer, a buddy of mine, he's like, dude, half of it is just training the parents, the dog owner to like do the right thing because they create a lot of the bad behavior themselves.
Yeah.
I feel like parenting is very much the same way where it's like, it's up to mom and dad to sort of provide the coaching for the good behavior.
Yeah. Honestly, Beav, there's been a couple other people that have been like, so it's basically dog training with humans. Like I have gotten that before. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't want it to sound like really bad, but I feel like it's a very similar concept. Like, and trying to get help, dads understand like, oh, I understand dog training. Like if I, it's like trying to make that correlation for people to understand. I'm not trying to be like, oh, treat your child like a dog.
I know what you mean.
I
know what you mean. Yeah. There's a big piece of like emphasizing the positives and the goods and like, how can we look at like intrinsic motivation too, though? You know what I mean? Like, okay, so we're rewarding our child for something. We don't want them to just work for a reward, right? We want them to have like those internal desires of like, why do they want to actually do something? Because eventually they're going to be like, okay, whatever, I'm sick of that reward. I don't
like raspberries anymore.
Yeah, she's like, I'm over that. You got to pick something better.
Well, kids are like that. One day pizza is their favorite food. The next day they hate it.
Yep.
And then they hate mac and cheese. You're like, what? You are not my child.
You're like, I know you used to love that.
Yeah. That's your favorite food yesterday.
Yeah.
What's my favorite is when they don't like it one day. And then you get with some friends and they order pizza and then they go, hey, I want pizza. I'm like,
You're like, I know. You told me
you wouldn't eat this last night.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. I feel like feeding causes a lot of drama in families.
Oh my gosh. It is probably one of the biggest pain points next to sleep.
Really?
Oh yeah.
You're not alone in that one.
It's always a thing. Always a thing. Growing up without a dad, how much did that dictate how you looked at your now fiance?
A ton.
Yeah.
Yeah. It made me, from a young age, realize, how important dads are. And I have always loved kids. I can't wait to be a mom one day. And I've always thought, dang, I realize how hard it is not having a dad around. And I want to do everything I can to make sure that whoever I end up with one day, he's going to be the best dad to our kids. Mm-hmm. And I could cry. I'm so thankful that I have Jack, that's his name, because he is amazing. He's going to be the best dad ever. So
that's awesome.
Played such a role into what my values are and like what I want, right? Because I couldn't control the cards I was dealt when I was little, but like, how can I take those experiences and help it shape what kind of family I want to create for myself down the road? And it just so happens that in meeting Jack, he perfectly complements, what I envision. But yeah, it played a big role in just my view on the world and future plans too, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the other common things that you do in working with kids in some of these milestones, like some of your maybe current patients right now? What are some of the things you're working on and how are you approaching those things? Like what kind of activities are you doing?
Yeah. Big variety of things. So every kid's different, obviously. But some kids I'm working on feeding, right? So for whatever reason, they are having a really hard time with feeding and meal times throughout the day. Some kids are working on gross motor skills such as rolling or tummy time, as we talked about before. Some kids, it's more of like, we call them ADLs in occupational therapy, right? Activities of daily living. So it's brushing our teeth or getting dressed. Some of those day-to-day skills we'll work on. some kids, the mom's like, hey, I just want my kid to be able to go to the playground. Like he is terrified. He cries. We can't even get out of the car. And I really want him to be able to go out in the community and engage in different activities. So sometimes we'll work on that. It's really, really family specific, right? So we're looking at the milestones, of course, and like what typical range are kids in and how can we get them to where we'd like them to be? And at the same time, like what's important to this family and what are their goals? Because I could have a list of things, but like if it's not meaningful to the family, forget it.
Yeah. So this is an interesting question. This is a financial question. How does one go about finding somebody like you to help work with the family? Is it expensive? Does insurance cover it? What does all that look like? Because that, to me, I'm like, this is something that like wealthy families do. They invest money in these people to come help their kid learn how to play on the playground. Like single mom Sally that's working 3 jobs ain't doing it. Or maybe they can. So I'm just trying to like figure out where we're at there.
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's going to depend on where you're at, right? The states are all different. For OT, for example, you could go through a private practice, right? And so some states you need a referral from your doctor. Some states you can just call them up and be like, hey, I think my kid needs an evaluation. Sometimes you pay out of pocket or insurance will cover depending on, what they decide they're going to cover. For early intervention, every state is different, but the state I'm in, you get a referral from your doctor or someone refers you or the parent themselves calls the early intervention program that's local and is like, hey, I've got some concerns about my child. They're like, great, come in. We're going to do an evaluation. We're going to do some tests, some questionnaires, look at how they're doing. If they have a certain percent delay, right? So sometimes it's 25%, or if they have a specific diagnosis where they automatically qualify, then you can get services, and it depends on the situation, right? Sometimes insurance will kick and cover some of it. Sometimes states will do a sliding scale depending on the parent's income. So sometimes there's not a cost to it.
That's nice.
So it's really, really situation dependent. But, if a parent's got concerns, definitely reach out to your
That's a hard pill to
organization.
swallow as a parent. Like, I think there's something wrong with my kid.
Yeah.
I have to imagine that there is a level of, I don't want to say denial, but something similar to that probably, that like delays them reaching out for help because they're like, they're fine. And then it goes on and it goes on. And then suddenly you're trying to play catch up, like for real.
Yeah.
So I imagine like early signs of anything, try to reach out if you think you can.
Yeah. If you've got concerns, it doesn't hurt, right? Because ultimately, what early intervention or occupational therapy should be is like someone meeting you where you're at, right? It shouldn't be this big, daunting, scary, like I'm coming in with this big, massive plan and you've got to do 40 exercises a day in this specific way. Like that's just not going to work.
Shocks the world, yeah.
Exactly. It should be like, hey, I think I need a boost here. I've got some concerns, and a practitioner will come in and meet you where you're at, right? Like what are the goals that's important, and looking at what tools and strategies can we put into your toolbox to help you through your day-to-day routines. So like I try to help parents look at it as this is a positive thing, right? We're throwing things into your tool belt that then you can utilize at your discretion in what works for you.
Interesting. Yeah. As we were talking about those things, I was like, man, where do you even start as a parent to reach out, Yeah. And then I was like, is this an expensive service? Like what is, so I'm trying to ask the questions I think people are going to want to know here,
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome. Like kids can make so much progress when they have, a good team of people on their side. And
do you have like a massive success story that you're super proud of?
Oh gosh. So actually, okay, I have a little girl who has a diagnosis. It's called arthrogryposis. Really big word. Basically, her joints are in contractures. So she's got a hard time with range of motion, really limited mobility. And so we had been working on getting her lying on her side to kind of use the fact that we're not working against gravity to be able to use her hands. And recently, I went to a session and mom was like, oh my gosh, Jaden, the other day she reached out to try to touch her brother's face. And her brother was just ecstatic. So little moments like that, like it seems so simple, but seeing what we're doing actually play into these success stories.
So you're dealing with kids that have some pretty extreme diagnosis, things like
Sometimes,
that. That's not,
yeah.
It's not as simple as teaching them to roll over because they're just, they just need help rolling or whatever the thing is. Like these are like real conditions that you're like,
it can be a
working
variety.
against.
Yeah. Sometimes kids have like pretty intense diagnoses. Sometimes it's like, for whatever reason, this kid just needs some support and there's not a diagnosis or anything in particular that's going on.
It's just not clicking for whatever reason.
Yeah, exactly. Like I have another kid who just a lot of challenges with like some anxiety and just going out and about in the community. Like he would not go to the playground, absolutely terrified. And his mom was like, I'm trying to take him to the splash pad and the zoo and I have all these fun activities. And he just does not want to do anything. He clings to me. And so we actually did a session at the playground, which was so fun. We went to the splash pad too. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to work. I'm going to go down the slide. But with him, it was like, okay, can we start out? Can we bring his favorite toys and play with them on the side of the playground, right? And no expectation. If he doesn't step foot on the playground, that's fine. But can he be there and be happy and playing? And then can we bump it up to like, can he put his truck down the slide? He doesn't have to go on the slide, but can he engage with that? And then can he go down the slide with mom? And then like we really grade the task, we'll call it, right? So what are these baby steps that we can do to meet the child where they're at and give them that just right challenge, right? If we give them a task that's just way too hard, we're not going to have success. If it's too easy, we're not growing. So meeting with the child and the parents to find that just right sweet spot. And like this kid now, he goes to this little play gym in his community and he's jumping off of balance beams and doing little jumps that are just shocking to see. Yeah. And mom's like, yes, my kid, like I feel like he's confident and he's able to do these things. So it's really just meeting the kid where they're at and looking at like, what do they need and how can I use my lens and my toolbox to meet them there?
Yeah. It's such a tough thing too, the growing pains of like some of those progression, you know? I remember my oldest daughter, her first day at kindergarten. We went to like an open house thing to like meet the teacher. And that was like, you know, this is what to expect, you know, at kindergarten. And these are the types of things we're going to be doing and blah, blah, blah. And they wanted us to like leave the kids in the classroom with the teacher, and the parents were going to go talk to other teachers about things, or this is how you drop your kid off, and this is the rules here, and blah, blah, blah. If they're sick, call this number, you know, whatever. And I couldn't leave her in that class by herself. She was like hyperventilating, and Cameron has done that before. And I was like, oh, if I leave and she's like this, she's going to end up throwing up all over this room because she has done that before. And I don't remember where I left her. And I was like, I don't know if it was daycare or what the thing was, but she was like, so upset and so anxious and so like just hyperventilating. I was like, and the teacher was like, you need to leave her. I was like, she's going to throw up all over your classroom. Like, but it's tough. And eventually I got her to like calm down, and I like slowly like backed out of the room, and now she's so independent. She could do anything, you know? Yeah. So it's just like, kind of, you have to push those boundaries, and there's a level of like, be comfortable being uncomfortable, especially as a parent. Like there's going to be so many of those moments where you're like, but they're upset. I don't want to leave them. It's like, you need to. It's probably best if you do, you know? And even the newest one now at daycare, it's like those first week and a half at daycare, you're like handing them off some stranger and they're so freaking out. And they're like, Daddy, no. And you're like, I'm sorry, I got to go. And you just like hope for the best. But
totally. And it's like working on that attachment so that when you do leave them, like they know you're coming back. You know, it's like in a perfect world, your kid is at the playground and like they're running free, exploring, and they look back and they're like, that's fine. I can do crazy stuff on the playground because like I know my dad's right there if I need him. Yeah. And like the more you can develop like that secure attachment, then they can do those hard things of separating and transitions, because it's so hard.
It's tough.
For parents too.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. It's been so awesome having you here.
Thank you.
Talking to us about all the things and educating us and getting a little nerdy. I love it. I think this stuff is great. I think it's so important to be talked about. Like this is the things you just don't hear about. You know, these are the things, especially dads. Like we don't hear about this crap. We sort of get preached it by our wives, and you're like, whatever, lady, you know?
Yeah,
But
stop worrying about it.
That's part of why I thought it was so important to have you here so that we could talk about it and I could give some context and relationship to dad to have them really understand why it's important and why it builds such a strong foundation for your kids and these fundamentals of something as simple as tummy time. And when your wife says we need to do tummy time, this is why it matters and why you should take the 15 or 20 minutes in the evening to do tummy time.
Yeah, adding on too, I think the biggest thing is just connection, right? Like at the end of the day, your kid's favorite toy and their favorite activity is you. You know, it doesn't need to be anything crazy and fancy. It's
they rather play with the box.
Exactly. They
than
want to push the diaper box around with you. And that is so meaningful.
Yeah.
And so helping dads recognize too, like it doesn't need to be this elaborate thing. Like, hey, you're outside working on your car. Okay. Can your child bring their little toolbox or can they hand you things? Like, how can we incorporate them into things you're already doing? Because it's just about that connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's been so great chatting with you. I'm really glad to be able to
tell everybody where they can find you. I know you have an Instagram page.
Yeah. So I'm starting to hang out on Instagram. My handle is the.playbooks. You can email me at theplaybooksbrand@gmail.com.
Oh, we're getting fancy.
Yeah, I guess.
Her Instagram
Just,
page is cool. It's got a lot of like cool tips and tricks about so a lot of the stuff we talked about.
Yeah. I just made a website. So I'm starting to kind of make some blog posts or just more educational resources for parents.
You should start a podcast.
I've thought about it. Yeah.
You should do it.
I have a microphone. Jack got me one.
Nice.
But have yet to make an episode.
You should do it.
Only if you come on it.
Okay.
So.
Done. Deal. Can I be the first one?
Sure.
Done.
Okay. Now I got to do it.
Now you got to do it.
Now I got to do it.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I really appreciate it. Again, make sure you subscribe on the new YouTube channel. And we got some new episodes coming soon. Catch you in the next episode. Peace.